unspeakable joy rises in my soul, never lets me go. He rules the world with truth and grace, and makes the nations prove the glories of his righteousness and wonders of his love, and wonders of his love, and wonders of his love. Joy, unspeakable joy, and overflowing well, no tongue can tell. Joy, unspeakable joy, rises in my soul, never lets me go. Joy, unspeakable joy, overflowing well, no tongue can tell. Joy, unspeakable joy, rises in my soul, never lets me go. First, Justin, I appreciate this shirt. I need you to know. Justin, can you pull me up a little? We got lucky today. That's the only other shirt I own that I wear at Christmas, and we're not wearing the same one. And second, I love that song. I love that last song y'all did. Thank you guys. My heart's just super encouraged. Mark, Kim, Justin, that was awesome. I actually asked them, for those of you who think I hate Christmas, I asked them to play Christmas songs this week because it is Christmas and it's a tight window for playing songs. So might as well take advantage of it as we can. If you are elementary school or below, and they already go, John. It's over. They went next door. All right, cool. They're in the present room if you want to go there and catch them. Otherwise, you're stuck with me. We are talking about Advent. I'm going to do something I don't ever do, but we had some printer problems today. So I'm going to don't worry, I'm not checking my Facebook while I'm preaching. I'm actually doing my sermon from here today. One thing people don't know about me is I'm not a huge technology person. So I've tried to switch back to a flip phone a number of times, and Jane has said I can't, so I have not, because I'd always be asking her for directions if I did that. But I'm going to go for my phone today. We'll see how that goes. So it's Advent. Like I said, it's an important time. I think it's an important time just because Christmas always feels rushed. I was talking to multiple people today, and they said, 'tis the season to be overwhelmed. For sure, that's the case. Some of you guys, or all of y'all are here today, but some of you have to leave early. You've got to go to something. Some people had something. It's just a crazy season. And so one of the gifts we want to give you is space to remember what this season is about. And so one of the ways we do that is we really lean into Advent. And if you don't know, if you didn't grow up in a church that celebrated Advent is what the church traditionally calls the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. The word Advent, it's related to a Latin word, perusia, but really for us, what it means is preparing. And what we're preparing for is to remember Christ's first arrival and to look forward to Christ's returning arrival. The spoiler alert, if you haven't read the whole thing, he died and he came back and he's coming back again, is basically the story. All right, there's cheering. I like that. I don't get cheered. Get it out of your system. That's probably going to be it for today because we're going to talk about money. So one of the things we do specifically at Highlands and we've done in our church life, are you trying to get that off there for me? I didn't want to mess with it. You did such a good job with it. All right, thanks, Mark. Mark Patterson, is there anything he doesn't do? So one of the things we do is we join in with other churches around the country and around the globe in this thing called Advent Conspiracy. And the goal is we want to conspire during the Christmas season against the feelings of busyness, the feelings of exhaustion, and the forgottenness of what the season is supposed to be about. And so there's 4 things that we focus on, 4 themes leading up to Christmas that we focus on. Last week, we looked at the idea of worshiping fully, and these really build on each other. And so I'd encourage you to go back and look at last week's if you weren't here. This week, we're going to talk about spending less, which some of you are like, thank God I'm here on this week. I've been trying to have this conversation about spending less, and this is the chance to get in. And it is. It's going to be fun. It's going to be practical. But next week, we're going to talk about giving more because as a follower of Jesus, those things can go hand in hand. Spending less and giving more. And then the week before Christmas Eve, we will talk about what does it look like to love all, especially the marginalized and forgotten. And so those are some great things about Christmas, some great traditions about Christmas. Now, here is one really stupid tradition about Christmas that has started to come up. And I love to talk about this every year because I think this is one of the dumbest things in recent history. And that's a hard competition. I'm going to go and tell you, there are a lot of dumbest things in recent history, but I feel like this ranks up here. And that is like how I constantly, even with streaming services, still every day, you guys, I see a commercial about someone surprising their significant other with a car or an SUV or especially a Lexus. 'Tis the season for savings, right? On Christmas. And the world telling us that is just a thing that people do, when in truth, it is one more thing that the world has told us is normal, but really should be reserved for psychopaths. You should not ever, ever, ever. That is a horrible purchase. If Jane said, I'm surprising you with a Lexus, a brand new Lexus on Christmas, I would be overwhelmed, but not with joy. It would be unspeakable, but only because I'm a pastor. It sounds horrible. Does anyone do this? Does anyone ever, you don't have to raise your hand. If you've done this, I want to know the backstory about how you got there, how it went afterward, how that went over. It just sounds terrible. And so I watch those commercials and I think about spending less, and it makes me think about gifts. I love to give gifts, but I'm not really good at it. But I know you don't give that gift at Christmas. And so here is your starter question. By the way, if you're an introvert, this is my gift to you today. If you're an introvert, except for this question, I shoved them all at the end. And so you can start coming up now with your excuse of why you have to leave before the discussion time. You can say, I have a whatever. And we will never know. And if you're saying, are you telling me to lie in church? Here's a little story. In the book of Exodus, I do not think you should lie as a rule. But in the book of Exodus, the Egyptian midwives lied and God blessed them. They lied to Pharaoh and he blessed them. So I don't know. Do with that what you will. So here's the starter question. She said, here's the starter question. What is the best or worst gift you have given for Christmas? All right. We'll do receive next week. You get to do receive next week. But this week, we're talking about the best or worst gift you've given. And I'll prime you with mine. This is what I think. I've given a lot of bad gifts. Jane has returned almost everything that I've ever bought her for Christmas and beyond. But I think the worst gift I ever gave, I was in high school. I was a junior in high school. And I had a girlfriend. And I'm going to leave her name off because we're friends on Facebook and she might watch this. But I bought her I was junior in high school. I'm a guy. I'm dating. You can see that this is going to go poorly for me if I'm already a bad gift giver. And so I went to Bath and Body Works. Do you guys remember Bath and Body Works? Does that still exist? Is this still there? Is it still a thing? All right. And I got her a basket when I picked all these things because my sister said that's what I should do. Okay. My sister said that's what you should do for her. Now, looking back, I don't think my sister liked her, but so on the day that we exchanged gifts, that significant other and I, we got into a fight, which was not uncommon. And she got so mad that she got in her car and started to drive off. And this is how I know it's the worst gift I've ever given. She threw it out of the car. And being the resourceful person that I am, I collected it and I rewrapped it and I gave it to my sister, who told me I should get it for her. I gave it to my sister for Christmas. So I regifted it. It ended up being fine that way, but that's probably the worst gift. I've never had a gift of all the bad reactions I've gotten from gifts. That is probably the worst. Getting it thrown out of a moving vehicle is pretty bad. All right, so go. Best or worst gift. You guys got a couple of minutes. Talk about your best or worst gift you've ever given. Go. All right. So I hope that was fun. I hope it made you feel better about the bad gifts that you've bought. I hope some of you were able to say, wow, I thought mine was bad. That one's bad. So did anybody feel like they beat getting your gift thrown from a moving vehicle? So fun story. You do? You felt like you beat that? Okay. No, you can't tell me that. You can tell me the story later, but not now. I feel like it could go bad. So another funny story is another funny story. This is my favorite. Jane's watching online, so I'm sorry, but I am going to tell this story. So like one year in March, we were in a store and Jane looked at these two lamps and she said, I love those lamps. Those lamps are awesome. And so the next day I went back and bought those lamps and I hid them in our attic until Christmas. And I brought them down at Christmas and she was so surprised. And she set them up and she put them up. The next day she was looking at them. She said, I think these are too tall. And she returned them. That was what really broke me. That was what broke me for sure. It's a tough one. So spending at Christmas, it makes me anxious because obviously I misspend a lot. I am the kind of gift giver who buys things that I think that if I were you, I would like. And a lot of people do that, and it creates a problem. But spending in general at Christmas, it's a real problem, and it's a real problem in our country. I always like to look at these stats every year, and I just want to tell you guys some of these things because a lot of you feel that same pressure, right, around this spending at Christmas in our culture. Parents this year plan to spend an average of $300 per child. Which is, and some of the kids are like, that's not even half of the iPhone that I want. So I don't know how that's going to work out financially. 1 in 10 people return their gifts to the store. So I get the lucky 10% in that. 41% of Americans are willing to take on debt due to gift shopping. Here's the one this year that really stood out to me that I hadn't seen before. $15.2 billion is the estimated total of unwanted presents So that means like things that you get that you didn't ask for, that you don't want, that you have nothing to do with. And you know you're going to get those this year, $15.2 billion. The average shopper takes on about $1,300 in holiday-related credit card debt, and it takes the average person about 3 months to pay that off, in addition to whatever other debt they're carrying. Right? And so it's not just about those numbers to us. It's not, as Christians, it's not just about the idea of fiscal responsibility. As Christians, we are constantly measuring our practices by the wisdom of God. Right? Because we believe that the closer we get to our practices matching God's desires, the more abundant our lives will be. We started talking about that last week, right? This idea of fullness of life. That's the goal, is that God looks at us, he says, I want your life to be full and abundant, and we want the same thing. And the question we're really thinking about this week is there a difference, and in fact, is there a negative correlation between abundance of life and abundance of things? Right? Here's some verses to think about as we jump into this. Proverbs 22:7 says, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is slave of the lender. Doesn't sound like an abundant life. Right? Psalm 37:21 says, the wicked borrows but does not pay back, but the righteous is generous and gives. Romans 13:8 says, owe no one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. So we talk about spending less. We talk about spending less for a variety of reasons here. Part of it's stewardship. But we talk about spending less because we believe that spending less might be a way to living more. There's this book, I actually read this last year when I was preparing for Advent. It's called Cash Values. It's by a guy named Craig Gay. He is not a Christian per se, at least as far as I know. But in this book, he says our tendency to put a price on everything ultimately degrades things of higher value. Our culture's biggest problem, he writes, is our relentless reduction of quality to quantity. He says it hollows out our entire worldview, depriving us of any sense that life is inherently meaningful, and it renders us increasingly insensible to the inherent qualities of life and to the real beauty and giftedness of being. Right? Translated, all those words, basically what he's saying is this. He says trying to measure what cannot be measured, right? Things like beauty, relationships, purpose, value, love, creates the effect of detachment. Right? It creates a space. When we surround ourselves with things, it creates a space between us and the risk that will come with dealing with us and with connecting us to the real things in life. Our whole being becomes virtual in that sense. Here's the truth about stuff a lot of the time. Right? Here's the hard truth, is that a lot of times we get more stuff to surround us so we don't have to deal with our stuff. Like that's the goal. That's why none of it is ever enough. That's why the next thing you buy on Amazon Prime is never enough, and you're going to buy something else next week. That's why the next phone is never enough. It's not just the upgrades. Right? It's why you're never going to buy the last thing that you buy. Because what we're really trying to deal with our stuff is our stuff. In one of the pathways, probably one of the most difficult pathways to spending less, we're not going to talk a lot about it today, is to spend more time with you and your stuff. Is to start to sit in quiet meditation, in listening, in asking, why do I want this? What do I think this is going to meet in my life? Why do I want to spend this money on this other person? What do I think that is going to create in our lives and in our connection? And what would happen if I didn't? See, spending less can be more about a pathway back to meaning, life, connection, and abundance than it ever is about making your bank account look better. It'll do that too, but that's not the primary role for it in the life of the follower of Jesus. Right? Spending less without caring less leads to more meaning in our lives, and it leads to more relief from the burden of hiding from our own stuff. So that's what we're talking about today. While you guys were sharing, the printer started working. It's good for me. Here's the truth, though, about spending less, is if you're going to spend less at Christmas, it actually requires more of you. It requires more of us to spend less. As soon as I started practicing this, my ability to think through Christmas, it was just that much more difficult, right? So much more than like what was a good deal on Black Friday. It required more thinking through, more assessing what I wanted to do to express love to the people around me. You got to ask a lot of questions, right? You got to ask questions like, spend less than what? Spend less than how much? Is there a number? The average American spends about $1,000 on Christmas things, right? So then you put that into couples, and that's $1,000 per person, things like that. And I'm not saying that like if you hit $9.99 for your goal this, Christmas, you did it. That's not really what it's about, but numbers are a part of it, and that's something to start with, right? The real exercise is to be willing to engage the question, be willing to engage the tension around what am I spending and why am I spending? How much is enough? How much is too much, right? It's a relational discipleship issue between you and the Father and you and the people who love you and love the Lord and you love, right? What do I see? What do we see the Father doing with our money this Christmas season? Here's some other questions that are good to ask. I told you it was going to be pretty practical today. Here's some good questions if you're the jot down type. What should I ask for? What do we already have enough of? Are my desires at all balanced with the current need in my community or in the world? Are my purchases going to increase good in my home, in my community, and in my world? Or are they just the latest thing? Are they just the easiest thing? Are they just the greatest financial value so I can look back and say, look at all the money I saved? I heard a comedian talk about, he said his spouse never says like how much things cost. Like we'll never tell him how much things cost. When he says, how much was that? They'll say, it's 30% off. He was like, is that a number? I can put that in the ledger, right? But it's the value, right? Like we're focused on this idea of I got a value for it. But the question is, did I really get a value with it? Is this really something that goes towards my long-term goals and God's long-term hopes for my life and for the community? We should think about environmental consequences when we purchase as Christians, right? We're called to be stewards, right? We should think about what story our gift is telling to the people around us. Not just the people we give it to, but the people around us. Right? That's part of our purpose as image bearers. It's part of our purpose as being called to be a city on a hill. And I know, trust me, like when I start to do this and I start to talk about this in my own home, it can sound silly. It can sound hyper spiritual to be, let's ask God all these things about our Christmas purchases. But if we're also being honest, wouldn't it be silly to not ask someone what they wanted for their birthday? Isn't that silly? Isn't that what we do when we don't ask these questions? Right? And here's the thing, like there's this part of saying like, well, if everybody spends less, then what happens to the economy? That's been a big thing for the past few years. What happens to the economy? Everybody needs to spend more because it's good for our country's economy. Is it great for our country's economy if citizens are constantly in debt? I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to get into, if you could snow me right now, that's fine. But I'm just saying, I don't know that that's great. But I will say this, spending less doesn't mean spending nothing. It just means thoughtfully evaluating what and who we honor with our spending and allowing that spending to support people, products, and causes that are worthy of being supported. Right? We spend less except when we need to spend more. When our spending more creates more value for the things God values. Right? Listen, this is an interesting road for me to walk sometimes when I'm talking about money. I don't think capitalism is Christmas's problem. I don't think capitalism is the world's problem. I think our uncanny ability to distort everything towards selfishness, fear, anxiety, and materialism. I think that's the problem. Right? I don't think it's any form of economics. Right? Greed and money at any cost isn't helpful for our world. It's not good for our world, and it's not good for our hearts. But Christianity seems to teach it's essentially a matter of our hearts. And what better way to start to deal with that matter of our hearts? What better time to start to deal with that matter of our hearts than just lay it at the feet of Jesus on his birthday? When we see our finances, regardless of size, as a gift, they begin to support that idea of worshiping fully that we talked about last week. 2 Corinthians 9:11 says this: "You'll be enriched in every way, so that you can be generous on every occasion. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God." Spending less can be a way to embrace a meaningful way of celebrating the Christmas story. It honors the first Christmas. You guys, we talked a little bit about them last week, but you guys know the Magi, right? The wise, they're called the wise men, but they're the Magi. You guys, most of you know that there weren't three of them, at least as far as we know. They just gave three gifts. But the idea of actually spending less and thoughtfully, it can be a chance to remember the Christmas story. I'm going to read to you guys really quick from Matthew chapter 2. Most of you know this story. It's going to start in verse 1. I think it's going to come up here on the screen. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the times of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly, found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report it to me so that I too may go and worship him." He's lying. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So how did the Magi give in the first Christmas? The first is they asked good questions. They brought their wisdom to bear. They asked God, "What's happening? What are you doing? Where should we go? How should we change our traditions? How should we change our paces?" They asked good questions about what they should be doing with what they'd been given. They sacrificed their time. Right? It's incredibly difficult to do at Christmas. It's an incredibly valuable gift to give someone at Christmas. Their time. And they only gave three gifts. We used to do this in our house before our kids caught on. We used to only give everybody three gifts, and it's a great practice because it really makes you think through, what am I going to do? Because each of their gifts was full of meaning, right? And so maybe you know this, maybe you don't. They gave Jesus gold. We all can kind of see it, the initial value of gold, but it had a really high value for a young couple who had nothing, and it just had a baby, right? The amount of expenses, the things that they could pay for with that gift. It likely supported the family during their time in Egypt. You would see if you kept reading in that passage that they had to flee and escape, so that because Herod was going around killing all of these male babies at the time, and so they had to flee to Egypt, and that's probably what gave them a way to do that. Gold is also traditionally a symbol of divinity, and so it had symbolic meaning, recognizing Jesus as God, as King in human form. Second one is frankincense. That was always kind of a weird one growing up. We all sort of messed it up. If you don't know what frankincense is, it's a white tree resin. It's used for incense. It can be used for perfume. It's also actually a medicine sometimes in some cultures. And they probably presented it, scholars think, as a perfume or as an oil to sort of be used to make Jesus smell better. But it also was used during worship traditionally in the scriptures. You look in Exodus 30, you can see it's used in worship. And so it represents holiness, right? It has a value there. Then finally, myrrh. Myrrh's the weirdest one. Myrrh's the one that you probably don't want to take to a baby shower these days. It would be a bit odd because myrrh, it's also a resin and can be used as a perfume. It's also a digestive aid. They used to mix it with wine to sort of help people if you had a bad tummy. But primarily it's used for embalming. And so it's a bit of an odd thing to give to a baby. But tradition gives it its meaning in terms of connecting myrrh with the wine that was mixed and offered to Jesus on the cross. Is also embalming was associated with the idea that Jesus was born to die. The gifts were both practical and generous, right? They gave money to this family, providing an important practical need. They gave these valued gifts that were also highly symbolic. And when we think through our giving in that way, when we think about giving our time, we think about giving our attention, we think about asking good questions, and we think about narrowing in based on what we have to give, as opposed to what we wish we had and then overspending. When we narrow in and say, this is what we have and how can we give it well, we celebrate the first Christmas story. Spending less also honors the return of God because it honors the character of God. It's one of my favorite quotes from somebody about Jesus and about what he was made to do. This is Chris Wright. He's a Christian scholar. And he says, what distinguishes Jesus' ministry from most of today's is that he amassed a following without commodifying it. People were not tallies to him. They were people. They were hungry. They were sick. They were lost. And they were in need of a God who could feed them. A God who recognized their deep inherent value apart from anything they were offering. A God who actually found value in their inability to offer. The gospel says that God counts the hairs on our heads. He is counting scrupulously, in other words. He is looking closely, but not at the world's profitable things. I told you guys, I ask God every year for a word or a phrase for Highlands during Christmas, and what I got this year was the parable of going out everywhere and finding the good and the bad, but mostly the forgotten, and inviting them into the wedding feast of the King. And part of, it's funny, like we don't think about it this way, but part of the commitment we make when we spend less is we say, your bank account doesn't determine your value. That's part of what we say to people, is that your financial profitability doesn't determine your value. And there's not much more countercultural than that. Spending less honors where salvation truly comes from. It honors that which can't be measured and put on a scale. Love and grace are immeasurable. When we start to quantify our value at Christmas by the number that we spend, we become people who keep score. Right? They bought me something, I have to buy them something. Right? And then you find yourself saying, well, then it's not a gift, is it? It's an exchange, right? Stop looking for a number. Start asking the Spirit to guide, release, and convict you about spending at Christmas. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. God is good. God is so good. One of the biggest lies in our world is this, that God just wants to take things from you. That God just wants to throw rules at you. God wants to give freedom. He wants to give abundance. And he can give it. We start to think about spending less in a godly way. All right, practical steps, and then I'll give you your questions. Practical steps for you this Christmas season when it comes to spending less. First, everybody on their chair should have one of those handouts. Those are some practical ways to deal with. I'll let you look at that on your own. Those aren't ours. Those are part of this kind of bigger group, this global group, Advent Conspiracy. They put those out. Some of those may be helpful to you in your life. Practical steps I would give you are these. Ask 2 to 3, commit yourself to say, I'm going to ask 2 to 3 good questions before I buy something. I'm going to ask 2 to 3 good questions before I buy something. Here are some good ones. Why this? How is it helping? How might it hurt? Second practical step. Think about the companies from whom you purchase. Think about the companies that you're buying from, if you're buying from companies. Third, this is so important. This is important everywhere that you want to be holy. Know your limits. Know your limits before you go in. Don't just go in with good intentions. Know your limits. Know how much is too much for you and what it looks like to spend less. Next, consider the people before you consider the gift. Consider your own core values. I'm not asking you to spend the way that I would spend at Christmas. What I think is God has given you core values. And consider those when you consider your money, right? Where your treasure is, your heart will be. And the last one is this, and I think this one's really hard. This one was hard for me. I get so nervous about what the people I care about are going to think that I don't have difficult conversations sometimes. The people in my house would say that's not true, but it is. And so talk openly and safely with your loved ones about limits. Make it a conversation. You're not a dictator in your house, but you're not a slave. Talk openly and safely with your loved ones about limits. That might be the one thing that some people in this room just need to know today. But I'd highly encourage it. I think you'll find life there. All right, we're going to throw the discussion questions up. I'm going to hand it off to y'all, and I'll close it in a few minutes here. Here are your discussion questions. What was spending at Christmas like for you growing up? How do you feel when you think about how much money is wasted at Christmas? And then who is the hardest person for you to find something for at Christmas? Y'all go have a discussion. I'll close this up in a few minutes.